Okay, so this is our second installment of Caring Conversations, and this time we have Rick Dilworth. He's our Director of Dementia, Caregiver and Family Services at Brella, and he's going to be helping us walk through a journey through care, from senior living to nursing care. And I'll just mention as well, we will have time for questions. We'll keep time at the end. And as well, we want to keep it as engaging as possible. So if you have any questions that are relevant to what we're discussing at that time, feel free to raise your hand or leave it in the chat box, and we will try our best to get to it in the moment. If not, we'll always circle back to it at the end as well. So just a little bit about us before we start. So we were called Seniors Come Share Society. We have a new name now. It's Brella Community Services Society. Our mission is to enable older adults, their families, and caregivers to lead full, engaged, and meaningful lives, keeping our core values of integrity, respect, compassion, inclusiveness, collaboration, and excellence front of mind. We offer services through our day programs, Dementia, Caregiver and Family Services, and Community Services. We've been supporting our community for 45 years, and we have 50 employees and over 100 volunteers. And from here, I'll let Rick take it away.
Okay, I just noticed where that resource went to. Did you see it?
I saw that too.
So that website that you saw sort of shoved in between some text, that should be somewhere in a slide later on, but yeah. a really helpful resource that I'll make reference to a couple of times during our conversation today. So as Nisa mentioned, the goal of today, there's quite a lot of information to cover, and some of it is vague for a reason, because we're dealing with people who live in different parts of certainly the province, but sometimes we've got folks from different parts of the country even, or their question would pertain to somebody in a different province. So some of it's vague for a reason, and the idea of leaving enough time to talk specifically to somebody's situation. One of the things that we find that occurs daily in our job is that we are trying to provide a set of standards while also trying to provide person-centered care. Everyone is individual. So the idea of trying to provide a specific answer, much of your question might be able to be answered, but we'll do what we can to perhaps give you more precise guidance at the end if we get the chance. And then one of the things that we'll welcome at the end also is if something was still unclear or assistance could be rendered, you're welcome to contact us, and that'll be sort of some directions at the end. And much of the information comes from a caregiver position. A little history about myself. I am also a caregiver and have been one for quite a long time. And so when I speak from the experience, I can relate. No, but I certainly can't put myself in somebody else's shoes exactly, but I can certainly relate to some of the things that they may be struggling with. So carrying on, I'm going to start with some Statistics Canada information. While the pandemic has affected the lives of Canadians and seniors, I have to move this, sorry. There we go. Seniors have identified as a particularly vulnerable population. Not only are seniors more at risk for severe illness, they are also more affected by isolation measures. As a result, many senior caregivers, especially those who help people living outside their household, may not have been able to provide care as they usually do. And as much as that may not be quite the situation it was a year ago, we are still finding that there's apprehensions about how things are done. And certainly the one thing that we know that came as a result of the pandemic was a greater understanding of what was going on. This problem pre-existed the pandemic. We just have a greater understanding of how impacted those people burdened with the care of another were already dealing with. So senior caregivers providing help to their spouse may have seen their burden of care increase given the possible lack of other supports during the pandemic. As I just discussed, 1/3 of all caregivers aged 65 and older provided care for a spouse or a partner. This proportion increased to 47% when focusing on seniors aged 75 and older, and to 50% those aged 85 and older. 1/3 of senior caregivers reported that their caregiving responsibilities were stressful or very stressful. To be honest, I find that a low figure. I would consider it to be higher, but we're also dealing with people in that situation all the time, so perhaps the stat is accurate. But nonetheless, I think that most people who find, as I'll note here, that if you are the primary care provider, then this is something that dominates your life. So stress related to caregiving varied significantly depending on the number of hours spent on caregiving. Those in a primary role providing care to another at home were 60% more likely to be hospitalized themselves while dutifully tending to the needs of someone else. The role of caregiver ranks as one of the most difficult and demanding jobs on the planet. The physical and emotional toll normally results in the daunting, gut-wrenching task of placing a loved one into an alternate care setting. Next slide, please. So here we have a graph that demonstrates the text on the next slide. We'll probably flip back and forth a couple of times because for those that like to see something visually, there's a lot of text in here because I'm sort of reading and keeping me on track throughout the presentation. But there are 3 distinct levels of care. And I do make reference to them all being levels of care because from the moment you start to implement assistance into somebody's life, it's a care measure. So independent living, so to speak, that's carried out in one's own home or in a senior living setting. The moment you start to receive help, it's still considered a first level of care. Assisted living would be also classified as semi-independent still. And all of these are further defined as we go further into the presentation. And full dependence that we oftentimes classify with long-term care. So for now, we'll move on to the next slide and then we'll probably refer back to this one. Next slide, please. So as I described, the 3 distinct levels of living options, housing, so to speak, for seniors. And when I say seniors, it's not necessarily for seniors. It would be anyone requiring assistance. So oftentimes the levels of care are also for perhaps younger adults who have been inflicted by a certain disease or some sort of illness. But we have most commonly these references to somebody at an older age. So starting with independent living, and some of what we're trying to clear up is the terminology that's used, because a lot of the terms are interchangeable. They mean the same thing. So independent living, note, as I've placed here, IL is commonly referred to as senior living. However, the term is also often utilized to encompass all elder care and living options, assisted living, and long-term care. With the defined levels within the defined levels of care that make up senior living or older care, there are a number of variations, far too many to even cover in this, but we're going to do what we can to help shed some light. However, each setting can be largely defined by one of those listed above. With the following presentation, we'll do our best to help to demystify choices and simplify the language, while hopefully creating a better understanding of very complex and often emotionally charged subject. Next slide, please. So starting with independent living, and everyone has a slightly different experience with this because as the text starts to describe, characterized by the onset of initial needs arising, brought on by aging, diagnosis of a disease or illness, convalescence from surgery or injury, etc. Typically defined by anyone requiring some very basic supports centering around health, nutrition, safety needs, and concerns. Examples of this would be the very first step to install grab bars or safety equipment in a bathroom. These are means in order for one to try to maintain living in their home. And most of the things, measures taken at this point are they're safety measures that are trying to be proactive in terms of minimizing risk. So other things that you start to see when somebody's mobility is challenged would be meal preparation. And then oftentimes you start to see the inability to manage household chores. Independent living can be supported in one's own home or in a senior living setting, so a designated space that is communally living with others of similar age. A key focus of the Canadian healthcare system is keeping people in their homes as they age. This is considered a high priority for provincial health authorities. Examples of independent living would be home health services and home health services through access through home health. And this is going to sound repetitive. It comes up a number of times because the only way to access funded services, oftentimes calculated on a sliding scale based on one's income, the only way to access that is through a community health nurse, through home health. That will mean that the need through an assessment, through the conducting of an assessment, the need will have to be significant enough to qualify. And for those, hard to say because we didn't do a lot of meet or greet or anything beforehand, it's hard to say what the mix of those attending today's presentation is, but most people have some understanding of you have to have a fairly significant need before home health can actually assist you. But other means that start to become useful at the time is hiring a housekeeper or a shopper. Those become very sort of difficult things for people, getting out to the store and hiring individuals. I'll touch on some of the tactics used in terms of trying to find reliable people to do this kind of thing. It's challenging, but it's not impossible to find them. Oftentimes with word of mouth, through networking and things like that, is to find somebody else who's already doing it, and perhaps they can start to assist someone else who has the same a similar need. And then of course the option that I've already alluded to, settling into a senior living community where meals are provided in a dining room setting. This also normally includes very light housekeeping provided weekly and laundry services. And each senior living setting is different about how, especially the laundry, you can pay for somebody to do it. Oftentimes it's much like an older apartment where there's laundry services available. But if you're not capable of doing that, that doesn't work for you. And there is the odd community where there is in-suite laundry, but normally it's laundry services available. And with each of the breakdown of senior living options, I've done a little bit of a pros and cons. It's not in depth, but some of the highlights would be a pro to senior living, moving from, say, one's own freestanding residential home to a senior living setting would be regular communication with the outside world, so far less chance for isolation, and increased awareness around challenging health if and when this occurs. So rather than, again, isolation contributing to the fact that people are not aware of any sort of changing needs. One of the other items that comes up in a con with each of the slides, each of the levels of senior living or senior care, is costs. And it's a pro and a con, because if you talk about the healthcare system funding or subsidizing it, then it's a benefit, but there's always a cost as needs start to become a reality. So and another con that I would list in terms of independent living is the high degree of reliance on family caregivers to respond to increasing needs as they continue to change. There is still a large degree of interaction. The need is significant as one's needs starts to change. So oftentimes when somebody was responsible for checking in on somebody and doing household chores or things like that, that doesn't really change. It's just sometimes we refer to independent living as at least there's eyes on what the situation is. So it provides a degree of oversight. Somebody's watching sort of what's going on. It's far less likely that if somebody didn't see you for days, that nobody would do anything about it. So that in a nutshell is independent living. And as I said, it's not inclusive of all. There's variations to all of this, and there's also between each level, a little bit of a gray area where there's overlap. So next slide into assisted living. Just asking if there was anyone who actually asked a question or anything about independent living. Is there anything that came up?
No, there's nothing right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on, assisted living, characterized by the semi-dependence for health, safety, and nutritional needs to be met. And I can't read that because there's something over top of it, but generally met in a, let's see. Needs or concerns are largely addressed by means of scheduled assistance, and typically defined as an open access assisted care setting. And when I refer to open access, meaning that there are controlled measures as to who's coming and going, normally defined by one's signing in and out, and that's monitored to a degree. But the single biggest difference between independent living, where there oftentimes is a bit of a monitoring of people signing in and out, they want to know who's gone to the mall that day. The difference between assisted living is there is more protocols as to everyone coming in and out of the building. And some of the communities are designed more as a concierge, where there is a front desk person also there to receive packages and make the entire experience of redirecting people slightly more pleasant. But generally, there's a security element. In assisted living, there is a 24/7 nursing presence, albeit this wouldn't be considered skilled nursing as would be the case in long-term care. There is a nursing presence to provide assistance with scheduled needs as well as those that may arise. So the biggest difference is these are oftentimes things that have been prearranged. As example, Peggy requires medications at 10 o'clock and she's not capable of doing that without assistance. So somebody is scheduled to go to Peggy's suite at 10 o'clock and assist her with that. As well as I've noted, that if something was to occur, oftentimes alerted by a call bell system, a lifeline, internal system that is, would indicate that if somebody's had a fall or somebody needs assistance of some kind. But otherwise, the primary goal is to have this on a scheduled basis. So assisted living can be supported in one's home or an assisted living setting. In one's home, that would be again by a party that you paid, or perhaps through home health, where they would supply, as again, a need was seen to be significant enough, assistance with activities of daily living. I make reference to that slightly further on in terms of exactly what that is. But again, a key focus of the Canadian healthcare system is keeping people in their homes as they age. This is considered a high priority for health authorities. And anyone who's, again, had experience, until we sort of get into a bit more of a chat, it's hard to get a sense of what people have experienced already, but most people understand that the need normally lagged, or the provision of assistance normally lags considerably behind the needs as they change. So your ability to be proactive throughout this entire process is something I'm going to repeat multiple times, that the moment a need arises, it's ideal that there's some sort of a plan that you put it into action. You've had a discussion about, when I really don't feel comfortable going out to grocery shop anymore, I heard that Myrtle down the hall has somebody do that for her. And it would be really ideal that you sort of check that out and see who does that for her. Obviously, in cases where these are communal spaces where multiple people live, it's ideal that that service could be provided to more than one person. Access to assisted living can be arranged privately, as I've sort of alluded to, paid 100% out of pocket, without specific needs of the assessment being the primary determining factor. So reading on, or subsidized by the provincial health authority. And to receive assisted living services in home for admission to subsidized assisted living community, an assessment would need to be completed by community health nurse, also known as case manager. The outcome of this assessment will have to indicate a healthcare need significant enough to qualify for government funding. The key there, that in their eyes, whether this need is significant enough, it doesn't stop you from finding somebody. Again, obviously, there's a financial element to this, but the idea that if you want to remain in your own home, these are conversations that should be had before a need occurs. And there are ways to help the direction of the outcome of an assessment, and we can probably get into exactly what that looks like a little further on in the question and answers, because everyone's had a slightly different experience. But I will say that the threshold is high, given that the structure of the Canadian healthcare system is that the reliance on family and friends is high. That's basically the way that it's been constructed. That would be the first go-to for anyone. And if the need has arisen because somebody's suffering a flu or a cold and having a difficult time bouncing back, the likelihood that immediate services can be put into place are almost none. There wouldn't be anything that would react that quickly, but asking somebody else to start doing that for you as a plan A would be my advice. Examples of assisted living would be home health services to assist with ADLs. ADLs, activities of daily living, would be considered dressing, bathing, medication reminders. This differs from, there's a fine line between what is considered an ADL when it comes to actually cooking. But at the same time, when somebody is trying to maintain living in their own home, and if the need is that, I can manage most of those things myself, but it's not safe for me, there's visual impairment, and so I really need help with the cooking element. First of all, there would be action taken to try and simplify that process so that there was meals that were more, perhaps Meals on Wheels were delivered, and so it was an easier process to heat them. There are all kinds of variation as to how you can start to simplify one's life. Again, the reference here that the assessment would have to be completed by a community health nurse, and the indication has to be considerable. Hiring private staff to assist with ADLs through different agencies is always an option. And the variation, privately, you could probably find, again, I hate to give numbers, but a variation, you can hire private staff from as low as sort of $15 to $18 an hour to do basic assistance around the home, to hiring a professional with a degree of understanding of what it's like to work alongside somebody living with dementia. You're probably looking at $30 an hour to assist that in a situation like that. So it gives you a range. An agency, different organizations available in the community, Nurse Next Door, Comfort Keepers, the hourly rate is slightly higher than that, sort of mid-30s, pushing even 40 sometimes. But it really depends on what it is they're actually there to do. And some basic assistance can be provided by a companion as opposed to somebody trained to provide personal care. Personal care would fall into an activity of daily living. Assisted living communities also, the general structure of an assisted living community looks much like the first sort of steps into senior living, and they would provide meals in a communal dining space, normally provide light housekeeping once a week. Sometimes you can pay for more than that. And laundry services are available. Oftentimes it is suggested that, again, there's a cost structure, a bit of a menu in assisted living where those things are laid out, what it would cost to do a load of laundry and to have it, done and brought back to you. The pros of assisted living would be peace of mind. This is repeated a couple of times because the more you go into care, the more one feels at ease that their loved one is being taken care of. So peace of mind to all concerned that health, safety, and nutritional needs are more able to be met in a semi-independent nursing environment overseen by assisted living lead, which is normally an LPN. Socialization is a primary focus. You're living amongst those readily at hand, and arguably not what we've gone through in terms of the pandemic, that your neighbors are readily down the hall for a visit. The pandemic obviously being contrary to that. The cons to assisted living, and the reference when I talk about wait lists would be, of course, as subsidized options. Wait lists can be long, and transition to a higher level of care in the future is likely required as needs increase. And some of those needs can be met perhaps under the same roof, where a campus of care setting, a campus of care defined as multiple levels of care under the same building, there is still normally a transition to another part of the building. And that would be explained in the next slide. Thanks, Lisa. Into long-term care. And this is one of the first sort of examples of, there's a lot of words that mean basically the same thing. So long-term care, oftentimes abbreviated as LTC, nursing home, residential care, oftentimes abbreviated as res care, complex care, these all mean the same thing. So when somebody's referring to that the definition to follow characterized by the dependence for health, safety, and nutrition needs to be met in a nursing environment, typically defined as a controlled access. So this means in a full care setting that one cannot simply go out as one pleases. It's locked to control the access. So and one way around that is being accompanied by a responsible party is normally the alternative solution. So as much as the access is controlled, people can't just come and go as they please. It doesn't mean that you can't go. It means you have to be in the company of a responsible party. Because if one truly understands the level of admission to long-term care, you are transferring the responsibility of care to the organization. So sometimes that helps people understand, why the rules are so stringent. But there's nothing stopping somebody from going out. Again, the pandemic was a challenge that changed all of that. But in a normal setting, it would be fine for somebody to escort you out for the day, for overnight, or whatever had been prearranged. A lot of sort of checks and balances in terms of signing in and signing out in a complex care setting. There is 24-hour nursing presence to provide assistance with any and all needs. So the single biggest difference is there will be a scheduled element to long-term care, but there is a slightly greater understanding that needs that are dealt with as they arise. And it comes part and parcel with the client base that you're dealing with. Access to residential care can be arranged privately. It must be mentioned somewhere further on that any of these options, anything is very likely available if you were to pay for it. I think there's a general understanding that as needs arise, that somehow the government will take care of you, and generally they will. But at the same time, sometimes to understand that perhaps for a period of time, that due to circumstances that arose unexpectedly, that it's not that there are other options that you could probably implement much faster, and as much as the cost would be greater, that only thinking about it as a short-term measure, because of the upheaval that normally creates to somebody's life, that there is these options do exist. And again, it's not lost on me that I know that these things cost money, but that's where having conversations around this so somebody is prepared should things go not according to plan. So again, the subsidized provincial, if trying to access long-term care or nursing care setting, the Provincial Health Authority needs to complete an assessment. And again, the needs need to be significant enough to qualify for government funding for that level of care. If one is transitioning from assisted living to long-term care, It's not a given that as needs change that this is the next step, but there is more of an understanding that things have changed and the next level of care would be long-term care. But again, it would be, so a typical assessment would mean the case manager coming to that setting, whether it be home or an assisted living setting, reassessing for needs as they've changed, and then authorizing sort of next steps. The pros to long-term care, again, I've reiterated, peace of mind to all concerned now that any and all health, safety, and nutritional needs are being met in a nursing environment. Overseen by a director of care, typically an RN, and quite normally a specially trained RN, somebody who's studied gerontology, but normally a minimum of an RN, with the clinical oversight being provided by a medical director. That is, in a world where trying to have representation by a GP is challenging. That is one of the benefits of a long-term care setting. This person is not readily available for immediate consultation. Oftentimes they have a large patient load, but there is it's automatic in that setting that somebody oversees. There's a medical director overseeing, except when somebody's requested a continued relationship with their own family doctor. It's really rare, because if you're not able to leave the facility, then that's one of the factors that indicates that this would be the better option. Institutional care settings are tasked with the extraordinary challenge. So I've listed as a con, wait list again, but this next part is probably the most important. Institutional care settings are tasked with extraordinarily challenging demands of attempting to provide person-centered care to the moment-to-moment changing needs of a large number of individuals with varying degrees of need, unique personalities, histories, etc., all with staffing to patient ratios that make this truly difficult. Sometimes when I'm talking about this subject, it appears as though I defend the healthcare system and things like that, but by and large, because I work within it, I do see the challenges, and it's by no means perfect, but at the same time, knowing some of these things going into it, as opposed to perhaps personal stories that have been shared, just to have that understanding is helpful. Just they are doing the best that they can, but oftentimes the models are a high patient to staff ratio, and they're doing the best that they can. So next slide. A little bit more about the assessments, because it's important to understand what's happening when, what's sort of the goal with an assessment. It's important to remember that almost any healthcare services, especially those that are leaning towards helping to keep one safe, can be paid for privately. These are very frontline, assisted with grocery shopping, doing some light housekeeping, or even heavier housekeeping. There's different programs available for those. We offer them through Brella. United Way, Better at Home program is one of the first forays into people getting assistance. They do exist, but oftentimes we find people who are in more desperate need that just unaware could have implemented some of these things beforehand. And oftentimes it's not to suggest that it's a budget item. It's something that should be considered if you're going to stay in your own home, or that's your goal, that there should be some discussions around, well, if I can't do this, I'm going to need to have some money set aside for it, or perhaps then it's not reasonable that I stay in my own home, and it's not unusual that if these things are needed and somebody's on a very fixed income, that families chip in to make these things happen. I've noted here that I know that the cost and things like that is stating the obvious, yet it's amazing how often and oftentimes it's a possibility that these situations come up when people are in the throes of chaos because something has happened, a fall has occurred or something like that. but the prompt is needed. There are relying on the system to take immediate action is going to, it's an exercise in futility. It's not going to happen that quickly. It's oftentimes the first foray into to getting more specific help through the health authority. And prior to that, they're probably not able to help you. It's immensely important to keep in mind, and especially in terms of duration, whatever costs incurred will only act as a temporary measure. When people talk about the costs, that quite oftentimes they're looking at if they had to pay for it for a number of years. Well, that's probably not the case. It's probably for weeks or perhaps months. And perhaps if there is a bit of a rainy day fund, that's what you use it for. Because if the goal of staying at home or getting out of hospital as quickly as possible is a goal, then that's a means of being able to do so. And again, I've noted that the system is heavily burdened and the processing is slow. This has come up more than once, but the only way to access subsidized home care services, to access placement into funded assisted living or admission to long-term care, is via an assessment conducted by a community health nurse or case manager that in turn may or may not result in authorization from the public health authority. Without that assessment being completed and their authorization or their referral, then it doesn't happen. They've made their ruling, and if it not seen as necessary, then it doesn't go anywhere. Time and again, families are put in a situation where they don't agree with it, and they're left to take other measures, and that means either further involvement on their own part. And then the next point, oftentimes misconstrued with the idea that the primary health provider, a GP or an NP, does not grant access to assisted living or long-term care. Your family doctor can be an instrumental tool in accessing home health care manager, home health care manager, but the decisions for referral to home health services, that should say, does not rest with your doctor. Access to home health services can only be authorized by a home health care case manager. Very often home health assessments, let's go back one sec, or go forward, I should say. Yeah, the home health assessment can be triggered by an incident or hospitalization. This is very oftentimes what instigates initial communication. And I thought I'd take the time to make note that oftentimes when somebody is hospitalized after incident, if there isn't talk of, are you connected with home health in any way, because it's normally part of discharge planning, if it doesn't happen and it seems to be, well, is anyone making preparations for how now this person on crutches or in a wheelchair is going to get around? It is probably up to you to bring that to their attention, that they live on their own, or this was becoming a problem. It's your own advocacy is really important at this point. Next slide.
There is one question.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So someone asked, what is the lead time for an assessment through home health services currently?
I would say an initial assessment where they've never, if it's not a reassessment, this is a first time meeting, I would say they're happening within a couple of weeks. Somebody bringing attention to saying, I'll use the analogy of somebody living in home, they've had no contact with Fraser Health, home health in the past, and they're now starting to see some need that within a couple of weeks, the first assessment. Implementing services will be longer than that because their goal of coming to assess is to determine the need. So for instance, if it was determined that perhaps some morning care assistance with a shower or something like that was deemed, they could implement that right away, sort of next few days following. But if it was a referral to another program like a day program, older adult day program, they would then be subjected to the wait list of the site wait list. So an older adult day program offering on-site programming 6 days a week, if all of their days are full, it could be weeks or months until you could access that. I'm hoping that helped, because again, everybody's situation is slightly different. And if it didn't answer your question, we can probably revisit it a little later. Next slide, Nisa. Yeah. So one of the primary goals of first talking about an understanding of what different options exist, and we didn't cover it all. My hope of the conversation was more to have it go in the direction of what the emotional impact of placing a loved one into care actually is. I don't mince words a lot. Oftentimes when we are fielding calls from folks in the community, they're normally at their wits' end when they're calling. So we've missed opportunities to implement things at an earlier stage. Doesn't mean that we don't do what we can at the moment, but at the same time, one of my key messages is always trying to be as proactive as possible. But I'll just go through some of the things that some of you may be feeling. And so no one wakes up one morning and decides, gosh, I really think I'm missing out on something here. I wish I could go to live in a nursing home. If that was the case, then the angst so many feel over this delicate subject would not be nearly so painful. I'm obviously making light of this a little bit in the sense that but there's truth in the statement. Nobody wakes up thinking this is what I need today. The realization and the reality of taking next steps elude most people. It just rarely happens that people, even if they've made a plan A, something happens and they, whatever has taken place, an incident of some kind, means that plan A isn't even something they can implement. They're on to plan B or C. And again, an example of that is somebody who is planning to stay in their own home. How do you say, move to the main floor of a home with stairs, managing to do so, but again lives on their own, and then has a significant fall where the convalescence is going to be considerable. One of the key factors is that they live alone. Somewhere the support is going to have to come from somewhere. And oftentimes if it is a convalescence, then a home health will step in. It's oftentimes seen as temporary. It doesn't always work out that way, but at the same time, what you normally have is the first look at services being implemented. But it's still not doable in one's home. So convalescence in a rehab setting is sometimes transitioned from an acute care hospital setting with the goal of getting you back home. The reality is that unless a spouse or family can truly, and this is being brutally honest, manage to manage the care needs of a loved one until death, then at some point the subject of placement into a care setting, and I say care setting in a broad sense because it may not be long-term care at this point, but somewhere other than the home they've known for years, it should be a conversation that takes place. The burden one carries to maintain the care needs of a loved one in the family home is a commitment unlike most anyone will have to face in their lifetime. As a loved one continues to decline, exacerbating needs for care and attention, it is not uncommon that the will to keep them at home grows stronger. And it's contrary to think that as it becomes more difficult, that someone's will becomes greater to just not give up. But we see it all the time. And that's where, having had the conversation to say, if this ever occurs, then I think we have to go to plan B. If the conversation has never been had before, then oftentimes we have people who just paralyzed with inaction. So, however, the toll that this can take may have greater consequences than ever considered. 1 in 5 otherwise healthy caregivers predeceases the frail patient they have quite literally been killing themselves to look after. There's a little bit of shock value in a statement like that, but it happens all the time, that somebody who otherwise was a healthy individual, who's dedicated their their lives to looking after someone, primarily to keep them in the family home, either suffers a traumatic injury or setback, and now their hand is forced, as opposed to talking something through and coming up with alternatives, implementing things where it does lighten the burden to some degree. But in reality, I'll just be honest, that oftentimes it takes an incident. So, and the reason why this happens is immense feelings of guilt, shame, sadness, regret leave many care providers paralyzed with an inability to do anything but continue the grind of every day, anything to avoid the dreaded outcome of placing a loved one into care. Grief, anticipatory grief, the sense of foreboding in relation to a potential or pending loss, can so overwhelm caregivers that they take little to no action to protect their own health and well-being, and in the process can lead to catastrophic results. So you can go to the next slide. What I mean by that is that if you are the key, if the primary care provider is the key to making this all carry on day in and day out, if something happens to you, that entire house of cards falls down. And I know that there's a common sense to that, but when people are living it, they oftentimes don't see it. And a phrase that I will normally not say to somebody's face until I've gotten to know them a little better, but I am a really firm believer in never saying never. Countless times I've had people sit, in a family meeting and say, that is never happening. I am never placing a loved one into care for whatever reason. They vary quite a lot, but I'll go on to sort of explain what I mean by never say never. If there's one thing that I hope desperately people to take away from this discussion, and that would be to at least be willing to discuss the possibility of what if. If something happened to me, what would happen to your father, or something, having the conversation just opens up a dialogue where even the peace of mind that comes from knowing that it's not something you're necessarily going to take action on, but if things were to go sideways quickly, that at least wishes were heard, which is one of the key factors in terms of trying to that people drag their feet so long in terms of taking next steps, is because the wish of an individual is of paramount importance, and that you're trying to avoid something they don't want. Few people can honestly admire as I can the steadfast conviction and determination that I know it takes to keep a frail elder with complex care needs in their home. The love and devotion that I have witnessed coming from those that exclaimed, "My wife or mom is never going into a nursing home," is more than commendable. But what happens when the person's making that statement, or for whatever reason cannot do it anymore? Something has happened, and it's just impossible. And it's that kind of conversation where trying not to do this alone, involving family and having there being an understanding, so that it isn't seen as a drastic measure. If it's been discussed before, it can't take anyone by surprise. So often it comes down to the fact that what we really need is for our heart to feel and our head to believe in earnest that we have left no stone unturned and gone to such exhausting lengths in providing for the well-being of someone we love before giving up. And I don't mean giving up. It's in jest that I say nobody's giving up here, because anyone who's already, put years into providing the care of a loved one, they're not giving up. But eventually the idea of seeing an alternative, it's only when we can sit in peace knowing that we have done absolutely everything possible that admission to long-term care, an admission to long-term care can be acted upon. Unfortunately, all too often it is not common sense that prevails, nor giving in to the unrelenting urges from concerned family or friends that moves the discussion along to action. With frustrating regularity, it is the worst fear being realized, the incident that we were all hoping against hope to avoid, that inevitably catapults a plan or non-plan into execution. Next slide, please. So again, a broken record here, or at least to a degree. I mean, I hear myself saying it all the time. So some of you may never have heard this before, but the idea, I can't emphasize enough the importance of being proactive when it comes to remaining in control of the future concerning the process of healthy aging. It is within your control. We don't control day-to-day occurrences, but being proactive in terms of, again, having a plan simply means that should A happen, then B follows. And if B is no longer possible, we've talked about a C or D. And that includes, arranging finances or whatever the next steps happen to be. But not having ever discussed it, not ever having that difficult discussion about, what somebody's feelings on the subject are, means that oftentimes we're caught off guard when something happens. No one person or one particular action is ever going to guarantee an outcome, but when it comes to maintaining the health and safety of an aging individual, the one thing that can dramatically increase the odds of getting to the finish line, at least as close, as strong a finish as one would hope for, the key is to anticipate, plan, and act. In the grand scheme of things, we do think, who do we think we're kidding anyway? We're not changing the end result. To date, no one has figured out how to keep our time marching on internally. No matter what we do, no one escapes death. With that said, to put advancing aging and latter life into perspective, the process of getting older can be a pretty bumpy ride, in the majority of cases with plenty of spills along the way. As I see it, our role as diligently devoted care providers and decision makers for those we love, it is not to do the impossible and stop the falling, but to do everything in our power to create as soft a landing as possible. Next slide. So that was a lot of heavy sort of dictating to everyone. Is there anything else that came up, Nisa, in terms of a question or anything like that?
Yeah, we have a question.
Okay.
Even if you have the funds, it is difficult to get a home care support person. Is there any program or assistance available to help finding good help for 3 hours, 3 days a week without using an agency like Comfort Keepers?
So one of the, we could do an entire session on this because it's quite detailed. And again, there's a lot of, a bit of guidance and a lot of trust that has to go into the process. So one of my favorite services to use is care.com. Understanding that many of the individuals who we deal with at Brella are spouses supporting husbands or wives, and they may lack some technical ability with using the computer. It involves setting up a profile, basically a job, with your wish list in as part of its design. So basically, you're looking for exactly what you said: 3 hours a week, describing what that would entail. You get to sort of set a price range. Care.com is not the only one, but it's a very reputable organization. They have a lot of different things that would also help walk you through it. I've certainly helped people set it up for them using keywords. The program itself, you can put an ad, so to speak, online and immediately start to get people responding to it, but it will also, you can also search with that key criteria, caregivers. And again, the range there, I think this is a really good example of you get what you pay for. It may be too good to be true. If somebody's willing to do it for $10 an hour, I would question what their qualifications are. There is normally not, if you're just browsing, sometimes there's different membership structures and things like that in terms of accessing things, but to generally browse caregivers that meet your qualifications, you can do that. Posting an ad, normally there's a small membership fee involved in that. It's well worth it. I mean, the other options are things like placing it on other sort of social media outlets and things like that, to put it on Craigslist. there's work involved in that. You are handling it. It's like you're interviewing these people yourselves. And for anyone who's the least bit concerned about what they're opening themselves to, there's a common sense element to it. You're not meeting anyone until you're more comfortable with them. You are so some of what an agency would provide for you, things like criminal record checks, a background history, work history, and their qualifications, is something you're having to extract yourself. But a lot of that information is available online. And if anyone is the least bit suspect about who they're interviewing or how that process is going, we'd be happy to help you with it. As I said, either construct an ad or interview, either help you create a short list so that you were nailing down good prospects. We do have a bit of a list. They're kept extremely busy. A bit of a list here at Brella. As I said, anyone who's really good at this work is busy. That doesn't mean, though, that given the demographic that we're serving, that there isn't turnover. There oftentimes is. And so knowing exactly what it is that you need and having a sense of what a budget would look like, we'd be happy to help. Again, that's an entire, we will probably do a bit of a session on how to place an ad for private caregivers. And again, what a range should look like, what reasonable expectations are, just to give people the reassurance that they're on the right track. Hopefully that was helpful. Was there any other questions before we take a quick break, Nisa?
We have a couple more. Maybe we can take a break and then get into it.
Okay. I think it's just literally a couple of minutes to just stretch legs. The hope with we have a few housekeeping things to sort of share with you, but generally the stuff that I was throwing at you has already been covered. And we want, there's definitely some resources we want to share with you, touch on things, and the questions that people have, they can be very specific. I'd be happy to answer as specific as possible to your situation, because very likely there will be elements of the answer that is beneficial to other people too. So why don't we take just a couple of minutes and then we'll get back to it.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Hang tight, everyone. We'll be right back. How's everybody doing? Lisa?
Yeah, I think we'll just take another couple minutes so
Okay.
people can get back to their seats.
Okay, good enough. Thanks for those that you have put something in the chat. We'll get to those. Those are pretty straightforward questions.
Okay, we can probably get started.
Okay. Thanks everyone for sticking in with us here. I forgot that I was going to actually start with, we'll get into some other resources and stuff like that, but there was a letter that one of the resources that will be included, I get stuff from them all the time and I highly recommend being part of her. She sends out updates and stuff like that. It's called careblazer.com. And a letter that I just recently received just helps to put in perspective some of, this is one person's experience, but we can all probably relate. So a little bit of history here is that this individual, it's a wife looking after a husband. She has full-time career as well. He has a number of different ailments, but primarily suffers from Lewy body dementia as a repercussion of Parkinson's disease. He suffers from hallucinations and a host of other difficult behaviors to manage. She starts by saying, I won't go into all the horrific details of what it has been like to live in this environment for the past 4 years or so, as I am sure you know how bad it can get for the person with dementia. I make his life as full as he allows. I live with grief every day. I live with grief every day, and my life has been very hard. Being the breadwinner while taking care of him, incredibly challenging. We never accepted his Parkinson's diagnosis, so that made his life hard and mine as well. He has put us in danger at times, but it has managed. We have managed for now. He is paranoid, so he refuses to give anyone power of attorney. So you know what that road will bring. He only wants to be home, so our world has shut down. I never imagined that by loving someone and taking care of someone, they could destroy your life emotionally and financially. I'm trying really hard to make sure I take care of myself, but sometimes I just want someone to take care of me for a few minutes. The stress and pressure can be suffocating at times. Then I find you, and she's speaking to this, I'm not sure that she's a doctor, but great advice, and she offers some courses. It has helped me gain perspective and set boundaries. The guilt I used to feel has subsided. I'm starting to feel like me again. This is still a tough road, and it will get tougher, but I now have more tools to manage and get through this. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And that would be the kind of sentiment that I'm sure in some way, shape, or form we can relate to. And oftentimes it comes in the deepest sort of despair, in the depths of despair, that we reach out and we're trying to, no one is going to fix this. we're not changing day to day. All we're doing is trying to manage. We're managing a set of symptoms. We're managing your expectations. And anyone who's living it can understand that statement. As before the break, what we're trying to do is in between the falls, the pitfalls, so to speak, is to try to create as soft a landing as possible. And that it is oftentimes it comes from the support received by others who are walking a similar journey. So support groups and things like that, highly advocate for that. We offer them here. They're available through Alzheimer's Society BC, Family Caregivers of BC. There's several that we'll refer to at the end, but highly recommend not trying to do this alone. As far as a question, these couple that are in the chat that I can answer pretty quickly. What funded respite facilities are available? That's from Joan. Locally, so I know Joan is local as well. Crescent Gardens, I believe, is currently offering. To access respite, it's again not done immediately. It's normally booked in advance. Fraser Health offers up to 45 days per calendar year of respite in a facility setting. So it's offering a stay in a respite community. The place in Fort Langley is escaping me right now, the name of it. What's the one? Delta View, to my knowledge. And those seem to be the ones locally available. And the only way to access a funded respite facility, if you're a home health client, you're almost pre-approved for those potential 45 days a year. But it's not like booking a hotel or anything like that. Some of the elements are like booking a hotel. I've seen the scheduling behind it, but it's not an immediate fix for something. Don't let yourself get so burnt out that you're needing it tomorrow, because it's not that kind of solution. And there's a really varied viewpoint from caregivers in terms of what happens when a loved one goes to respite. And this is just reality, that no one provides as good a care as you do. I don't care who you are, because as long as you're doing this, your care is better than anyone else's. So the routine is broken. The environment is not something they're used to. Respite is primarily for your rejuvenation, you needing a break for whatever reason, to either attend an event that's really important to you, to give yourself a break. It's not nearly as beneficial for the individual because of the upset to their routines. It's not a bad foreseeing to the future in terms of how somebody may react to long-term care. I say take that with a grain of salt, in the sense that when you really come to a long-term, forever admission to long-term care, then you have to be looking at it from a different perspective. But it's not unusual that people do report that their loved one has suffered some decline while being away from home. I just realized I'm going to have to plug in my computer. Oh no, I guess I should have done this first. So not to scare anyone off, the idea of respite and using it throughout the pandemic, we had a lot of people not utilizing any of that because it was just, well, I mean, it stands to reason nobody was going anywhere, exposing themselves unnecessarily to something. But the primary role of respite is, again, for the caregiver to get a break. I wish that the experience was a better one. Sometimes there is just, there has been the odd occasion where somebody has actually stabilized. That environment where there was a little more hands-on. The routine that was there was actually something that helped create an environment that was conducive to an individual. Um, but again, it's a subject we could probably go on to forever, but for the most part, every health authority, the 5 health authorities in the province are slightly different. As I said, I'm speaking of Fraser Health when I say that there's 45 days per calendar year, and the only way to book it is through your case manager. One sec. And the other one in the chat here, you talk about hiring an OT or PT to assist with mobility issues. I highly recommend, again, this speaks to being proactive. I highly recommend working with most folks, and again, it's a luxury, not everyone does have, but if you have extended benefits, by all means utilize them. Whether that be in-home PT services where they're working consistently with somebody, max them out. There's really no sense in having these benefits and not utilizing them. And if it means that you don't have that kind of coverage, and the idea of many PTs and OTs, the role that they play is somewhat interchangeable. They're different in the sense that an OT coming in and assessing the safety needs or concerns that exist in a household, a PT can normally speak to. An OT is the expert in how to devise ways of managing a setting given one's limitations. And a PT is more, they're going to work with a program or help to address mobility issues. Again, meeting somebody where they are in terms of what needs are there, and working within somebody's limitations. But I highly recommend it. And again, it's not something you have access to through extended health, that looking at your financial situation and saying, well, can I, what would this actually cost me? Contacting, again, if you don't have a relationship with anyone, no one can recommend to you. We have a few that we normally don't recommend one. We give you a few names. For clients that I oversee, directly oversee their care, anytime there's an opportunity to work with them, I do. How long can someone stay in respite? For example, my wife and I support my dad 24 hours, 365. They're overnights up to a week. There's absolutely overnight. The idea of, so the reference to the locations that I made reference to, Crescent Gardens and things like that, that would be where somebody was going overnight. And I believe there's a fairly recent protocol where an initial stay has to be for a certain period of time. I try to have people understand what it's like to have somebody be admitted to a long-term care setting. There's a lot of checks and balances that need to be put in place, and it's very little, the process is very little different for a week than it is for the rest of their life. Everything needs to be in place. The comment about a lot of stress for the patient too, I would agree. I'm assuming that is in reference to what I was talking about, the kind of changes that would occur. Put it this way, the number of those folks that have 45 days of respite per calendar year that utilize them is not incredibly high. There are people that use it and use perhaps the whole amount, but it's one of those things where there is, my advice is to use it wisely, to try and have it correspond with something that truly is going to, there's going to be some upset, one, getting prepared for it, and then when the person returns, there's a rebalancing period, so to speak. So to consider that. So whatever you're doing, I'm not diminishing the simple value of a break. I'm not, because if you need a break, you need a break. But if it is also to in some way recharge or do something especially enjoyable, like attend an event, then I highly recommend using your respite time that way, because there's just more meaning to it. It's not, it's one of those things where I can't emphasize enough that the respite and the system, the way that the system we work within, respite is designed primarily for the care provider. It's really not. Obviously, all the needs are met for a patient, but the idea of doing something temporarily that is that far of a departure from every day, it will normally have some consequences. But if you're truly going to make it to the end yourself, if the goal is to maintain somebody at home for as long as possible, then by all means, the only way to do that is to take a break. And the only way to truly get a real break is respite services. The idea of having somebody attend a day program, which an older adult day program, again, these services are only accessible through home health. The day program is not for everyone either, but it is less restraining than, less involved, period, than somebody going to do overnights in a long-term care setting. And it's sometimes, there's a lot of apprehension with going to the day program. In my experience, normally that falls by the wayside quite quickly. People are looking to be engaged in some way, shape, or form. The 5, possibly 6, if somebody is being transported by Handy Dart, 6 hours that provides is a welcome break. And that's sort of what it looks like for somebody attending the day program, where they're not being physically picked up or dropped off by somebody else, by the caregiver. If it's been arranged, they'll be taking Handy Dart. That gives you about a window of 6 hours, depending, to do whatever you want. They're in the care of very capable people. They will be engaged, and it's not for everybody. There needs to be a certain degree of ability to be a candidate for an older adult day program. We do have specialized days and staffing ratios for those living with dementia or with specifically high needs. And I say we when I make reference to that because Brella we've operated day programs for years and have a location in South Surrey, Newton, and Guildford. That is, again, Fraser Health funds that, and so the access is only through home health. And so that if one is considering a break, what a respite looks like, then and the case manager agrees that this would be a good option for the individual, then that might be the first test of a respite. And otherwise, one of the best options in terms of providing a break is to have, again, home health can provide a block of time where somebody qualified to meet any sort of needs that may arise. They're not normally terribly engaging. They can be. I mean, if it's been agreed upon, family is aware, and the individual wants to go for a walk, and it's been prearranged that person is safe to go for a walk, then that is something that somebody can do. By and large, it's a bit of a sitter who's come there to engage a loved one for any needs that they have, while you attend to 100% of your attention to doing something else, whether that go for a nap or go shopping or doing whatever. That can be arranged through home health. And you have to, in their eyes, you have to qualify for it. That the need has to be there. And in those situations, specifically if you're having assessment done for those purposes, we'd be happy to help set the stage for something like that to help increase the odds of it being authorized. In a situation like that, it is in your best interest not to portray things better than they are. I don't mean mislead about what it's like on a daily basis, but for instance, if dad is not used to, if the a common day doesn't start with you having, dad perhaps dresses himself, but you wouldn't want him going out looking like that. Don't fuss with him to make him look presentable. Have the case manager see it as it is. This is a direct, this is what every day looks like. And it's really important that they see that. Time and again, we have very prideful individuals who take incredible care of a loved one and want it to be projected that way, that when somebody comes into their home, it's meticulous, and the individual, who's being assessed is, there's not a hair out of place. If that's not normal or that's not easy to do, don't do it, because it's not going to indicate any need at all. It's really important that they see what every day looks like. Otherwise, it doesn't appear that though, why would I utilize these government funded resources for somebody who looks like they're managing just fine? So I think that that's sort of an important thing to keep in mind. Is there anything else that I'm not seeing? Oh, there's another one.
There was a comment earlier.
Uh-huh.
There was a comment made earlier that I can share.
Okay.
Unless you're getting care services from a not-for-profit agency, most private care services are between $30 to $48 per hour, depending on what level of care is required and hours involved. Paid housekeeping usually starts at $35 per hour. These are my experiences. And
those are invaluable things to share with somebody. I think I was sort of in line with saying an agency, again, that would be Comfort Keepers or Nurse Next Door or Harmony or whoever. They're only sending in qualified individuals. They have other costs associated with running a business, and for those reasons that it's mid-30s, sort of a starting point. And again, it really depends on if what you need can be provided by a companion, like it's playing a game with somebody or doing an activity, and there really won't be any personal care needs that arise. It's really hard to predict that, so that's why I oftentimes say go with be more prepared for something happening, because if you truly are stepping away, it's a day out or an afternoon out for you, and you paid for the services. Make sure that any situation that arises will be able to be dealt with effectively. And as pointed out by the person who made the comment, if it's a nonprofit, then sometimes you're looking at sort of mid-20s for a similar service to be provided. And again, some of those things, depending on one's income, means that qualifying for better at home housekeeping services, that locally that would be through Brella. There's a small wait list for housekeeping services, but there's also access to handyman services and a few other different things. The need is significant, and so there's the need never stops. So as much as we pride ourselves on trying to maintain a wait list that is reasonable, there is movement in that because of the demographic that we're dealing with. And as an interim, then if a subsidized rate through United Way, a better at home service is going to be next to nothing, that perhaps then you find it in the budget to pay for it for a few weeks or a month or whatever it happens to be. Most people get hung up on the costs of this care as it increases in the thousands of dollars, as if it would be for decades. And again, I don't mean to minimize. We live in an area, and I'm sitting in South Surrey right now, where there's means where perhaps people don't necessarily commonly look. And sometimes it's just having that very frank conversation about, well, this is really important to me. Perhaps I could do without something else, or it isn't, an impossible conversation to have with, children who are doing really well for themselves. To say, I could really use the help with this. It's hard to ask, but just, bringing up the conversation more about the needs and how you're managing, and allowing that sort of eke in. Well, if I could get the help, it would be, perhaps more doable that mom or dad stay home. And we are happy to help facilitate that kind of a meeting. Family meetings, care conferences happen here all the time. It depends on what we're trying to get out of it, what the situation is, but oftentimes a meeting of the minds, bringing perhaps it's an understanding that people just don't understand what mom or dad is going through in terms of trying to keep their partner at home. and that probably won't come through in a meeting either. We are a great third-party conduit to sort of help that conversation start, but normally people really won't get it unless they've actually been put in a situation where they have to provide the care themselves. And there's nothing wrong with asking them to do that, to say, can you help out for a weekend? I'm gonna do something. It's hugely eye-opening. And because quite oftentimes the pushback or the resistance will come from somebody who's slightly removed from understanding what's really going on. And when they're put in that situation of going, wow, I had no idea what you were having to deal with, then, okay, perhaps we need to talk about next steps. It's important to have permission. Here, we're all about doing that. But primarily that comes only secondarily to whatever somebody's wishes are, and whatever we can do to sort of maintain wishes that have been expressed, where it means that somebody can maintain somebody in. It oftentimes is a transition to a next care level that somebody is resistant to. That he wouldn't like that, or she wouldn't do well there. Sometimes it's just not an option. There's not an option because it's no longer safe. It normally in lower levels of senior living settings, like it's not uncommon at all to receive an eviction. It sounds harsh, but to receive an eviction from a senior living setting when you're no longer appropriate, your needs are too great. It's obvious by all other parties that reside there that this is no longer working for you. There's oftentimes, incidents that have happened. Somebody's no longer able to manage getting in and out of their apartment, constantly calling for help, not showing up for meals on time. It just becomes too much of a chore. Oftentimes those telltale signs, those unto themselves are not reason to. It really depends on the setting itself as to how much they're willing to work with you. But at the same time, those are the telltale signs that people are looking for to say this is no longer manageable, because independent living, as it suggests, there has to be a higher degree of independence. And those are not things we want to do, but oftentimes we're better to be proactive about trying to take next steps before we're forced to. So, was there anything else in comments or chat or anything like that, Nisa?
No, not right now.
Okay. I was going to move on to sharing a couple of other, so I believe it's not just me looking at the caregiver support poster. So this is one of our projects. This is a project that Nisa and I work on together. Caring for the Caregiver is a program that we received some funding through Peace Arch Hospital Foundation last year. The grant for that has run its course. It was very specific in terms of outcomes that we were trying to achieve and what the goal of the funding was for. We're awaiting an extension of our Caring for the Caregiver 2 project that we've just recently presented to the steering committee of Peace Arch Hospital Foundation. They really liked what they saw. They had some great comments about what we've been able to achieve in the pilot year. I highly encourage anyone who's attending today that these are anyone who can identify with things that on the poster or the comments about our project, that's what we're here to do. Most of our supports oftentimes somebody who's just at their wit's end and not coping well. We work with somebody one-on-one before a support group would be recommended. I highly recommend a support group because so oftentimes the kind of understanding that you're looking for and one can relate to comes from somebody else who's walking in your shoes. Not to say that we can't. As I said, I can oftentimes relate, but at the same time, it is that collective voice is sort of urging you on and carrying you, so to speak, when you just don't feel like you can do it anymore. So our support groups have been online, but we are getting back to in person. We had some great support groups here before the pandemic, a number of different days that were offered. So staying tuned for now that there is truly a reopening, so to speak, where we're seeing people face to face, understanding that there are still people with hesitancy around that themselves, but we are slowly opening up to that kind of gathering. And otherwise, there is other means of trying to assist others. There was a question or comment that popped up. What's the difference between working with a social worker versus a caseworker? I get asked all the time when somebody's having a difficult time navigating through a system, isn't there a social worker involved? There probably is somewhere along the lines. Our system has social workers in place to help guide through the system, refer to programming that's available in the community, to a large degree hold the hand of an individual who is not coping, or could use services in some way, shape, or form. They're connectors through our healthcare system. Oftentimes a great emotional support as well, but it's limited. They're oftentimes very connected to a program or a resource of one kind or another. So there's not oftentimes a lot of lateral movement. So they may not follow your case, whereas a case manager or caseworker, as I refer to as a case manager, a home health case manager, they're assigned to be your decision maker, so to speak, when it comes to health, home health. So services offered through Fraser Health. To be honest, the faces and names change quite frequently. Case loads are oftentimes split and divided and things like that because the need is so great. But it's a really important relationship. Without them in your corner, any sort of subsidized assistance is, well, next to impossible to get because they are the conduit to gaining it for you. A social worker will normally not be able to be able to authorize. They can walk you through a specific situation and perhaps make a referral to, again, another program, say grief support through hospice, or oftentimes social workers refer to Brella. Again, great sources of information. You'll encounter them in a hospitalized setting, hospital setting, and various, even in home health, there's a social worker that can help specifically as it relates to perhaps accessing of services. So say you've got, if I made reference to the letter that I read, if your loved one is being particularly difficult about allowing people into the home, a social worker would be a great resource to come in and help try to smooth that over, if at all possible. I mean, this is a stranger to the person who's already not wanting people in their home, but they are well equipped to try to deal with those things and more specifically help you as the individual who's being impacted by this deal with it. Also, again, great connectors in terms of hosting family situations where there's a lack of understanding, lack of support. The case worker or the case manager in this case is going to be able to authorize and first of all recommend and truly authorize the subsidized financial aid, if you will, and then be specifically assigned to you until such time that it changes. Their role basically from the very first foray into somebody wanting to stay in their home, as I've alluded to, initially when somebody starts to see the need for things arising in the home, I tell people to really measure their expectations about what home health can do. Initially, you're starting to see need for help, but as long as that person doesn't live alone, meaning if you were the spouse or children of an individual, who reside there, the expectation is that you will help them. So if there's truly a lacking of another party to help, so therefore there's a safety risk or the potential of going hungry, so to speak. Otherwise, there's a large degree of expectation that, well, there's somebody there, they can help with that. If somebody lives alone, there's a greater priority placed on what they can and can't do, and so therefore who would provide it. They still look to family to try to fill those roles. But with accessing, if somebody's truly not able to dress themselves in the morning, and that is something that a caregiver, say you've got a husband and wife, mid-80s, the wife is largely healthy but has her own ailments with arthritis, and it is really quite difficult to manage things like dressing her husband. That would be a good case for, yes, she's there to help him, but it's really quite a struggle for her. It puts her at risk herself. That would be a good example for a caseworker to say, then, some morning help to get dressed. There's a valid case for that kind of thing. If it was somebody's quite able-bodied, they would say, well, how does it work now? That oftentimes people are taken aback by that kind of a comment, but oftentimes it's not emergency, but by and large, if somehow the need is being met by somebody else, they are reluctant to step in and provide. So the greatest priority for those is for those who live alone. And otherwise the need has to be considerable in order for them to offset it with resources from home health. Like, again, sending in staffing to help with a shower assist. An example there, again, if somebody was not, it wasn't seen as safe for an individual also in their mid-80s to try and assist her husband in the shower because it's just wrought with potential problems. That's a reasonable request, is to say, well, he can't really do it without somebody being there. So I help him, but it puts me in a really precarious situation. It would be a good case for to put forward and say, I could really use this kind of help. And that was where I spoke earlier to, if you have this kind of pending meeting, an assessment with Fraser Health, with a home health case manager coming to your home to do an assessment of that nature, we'd be happy to help coach a little bit about what the expectations should be and how you present it, just so you're a little bit more prepared. It's oftentimes also very helpful if you have family that are on board. They truly understand how difficult it is to have them there as a support, not only to keep it the exchange of information all organized, that what was said and things like that. Sometimes it's just really helpful to have somebody else there to make sure that you say all that you meant to. There was the comment, forward thinking to put your loved one's name at an assisted subsidized living facility before the needs arise. They're not going, for one, they're not going to put, an assessment would need to be done in order to qualify for subsidized assisted living. And if the need truly doesn't exist yet, they wouldn't authorize it. You could put somebody's name in for assisted living, paying privately for it. Absolutely. Again, that's where the restrictions, there is no restrictions to that. You could do it. And that's sort of hedging one's bets, because there's wait lists for everywhere. There's a wait list for private as well as subsidized. They're different wait lists, but at the same time, if you see a pending need, and sometimes it's just, again, peace of mind knowing that if you live in a high demand area, that I don't know when I will or will not be able to do this anymore, and we've discussed it as a family, and this is something we're sooner or later going to have to take action on. a really common occurrence is somebody transitioning to an assisted living setting where they are paying for it, and it's almost a given. Again, there has to be a real obvious need that somebody's needing the services available in assisted living, but it's not uncommon for somebody to reside in assisted living, be assessed there, and then be placed on a subsidized wait list and then transition there so that it's more cost effective. But the assessment won't work in your favor if it's just, if there's no need yet. And therein lies the issue, because it's hard to know exactly when that will be, but at the same time, that's advice that I give to people most often. If you know this is looming and it would make you feel better, and you've made some choices, on the subject of choices, one of the things that people oftentimes ask, what ones do you recommend and things like that. Well, first of all, I'm not in a situation where I can actually say that. Again, I would normally get a little more criteria, details that somebody wanted. They were thinking themselves, like one of the key criteria I tell people to approach placement in a care setting is the geographic location to yourself, to the family, or to loved ones, anyone who's intending to visit or to continue being part of that person's life. It should be convenient. Don't underestimate what that means. They're no longer in the living room. They're no longer down the hallway. So convenience is a big factor. Obviously, it's a place that's comfortable, and it meets a general standard that people are in agreement with. But the idea that location is important for all levels of care, in terms of if one is going to remain in the lives of those who have transitioned to care. There are cases, in all honesty, where that doesn't happen. In the cases of somebody with a dementia, where the difficulty is so great in continuing to see that person on a routine basis, perhaps they still do occasionally, but on a routine basis where it's daily, it's just too difficult because there's no awareness anymore. There's just not an understanding of who that person is. You become a stranger to them. It's not as important then in terms of how close it is in terms of proximity, so that it's convenient. And that's hard for some people to hear, but it is reality, where oftentimes it happens where there's a good intention to continue to maintain being part of somebody's life, but it's emotionally very difficult to do. And there's no judgment there in terms of saying, having the occasional visit where this is the person you married, or your father or mother, or whatever the case is. But sometimes being exposed to it is just too difficult. But very early stages where there's going to be continual, visiting, so to speak, convenience is a huge factor, because the busy lives that everyone lives. It's, especially throughout the pandemic, if visitations were minimal, and you had protocols that needed to be followed, and many of those places, some protocols still exist. It takes time before you even get a chance to visit. So convenience is a big factor. And for instance, if it's doable to get there 50 minutes by car, but that situation changes, and for again, in a spousal situation where the spouse is no longer going to be driving, and 50 minutes by car is no longer potentially walkable, or it would be a considerable challenge. So then there's taxis involved and other things. But so convenience in terms of location is something that I emphasize in terms of one of the criteria to consider.
There is one more question that came in. What care or services won't home health services support? Also, I have heard time is also less than 1 hour in duration on site. Is this true?
Again, the assessment is a needs-based assessment. So if they're saying a person with significant mobility issues, so somebody is wheelchair bound, but the task of getting somebody dressed and up into a chair, normally that's a two-person at any rate. The general morning care or bed care wouldn't require more than an hour for two people to do. They would do it based on a safety need for two people to efficiently and safely move anyone, whether there's lifts involved or whatever. They normally even don't have people using lifts without two people being there. But if whatever the care need that's being met should be able to be done within an hour for two people. I can think of many instances where that's more than achievable. If there's multiple things that are involved, it really depends. So if somebody lives alone, is wheelchair bound, so assistance in and out of bed and toileting is involved and things like that, it's not unheard of to have it be longer than that. But normally they would break it up with a different set of individuals coming back to, say, perhaps make a meal or do something else. Respite breaks are the exception. Respite breaks are normally more than an hour because if the focus is to give somebody a break, almost nothing can be achieved in an hour. So respite breaks, they're primarily a sitter situation where somebody qualified is there to make sure that anything that arises, you can go about your business and leave. Anyone who's doing that, I mean, you've got those who are really good at their job and who love what they do, and those who are just qualified to do. We've all encountered them, and I think for the most part, the goal of relieving you to go do what you need to is the primary focus of a respite. When there's a greater effort to get to know somebody and engage them and help provide them with a bit of insight as to what somebody likes to do, the visit is going to be better. It's going to be, time will go by quicker. It just makes it more enjoyable for both care staff and the patient that's there. That being said, it's hit and miss. Home health providing respite, it's not that the focus is on the service itself as opposed to the individual who's providing it, meaning that the continuity is sometimes lacking, or oftentimes lacking, I should say. So it's normally not a person who is familiar to the situation. It can be, it's not to say it never happens, but normally you have to reorientate the person who is coming to relieve. That takes a few minutes, providing them some expectations. If it's outlined in a care plan, agreed to previously if it exists in a care plan, that is oftentimes the overriding factor in terms of what a care staff is going to go by. They're not going to fix a meal unless it's directed in the care plan. It seems like a very simple thing that they're there for 2-3 hours and it's over lunchtime that they would make lunch, but it needs to be addressed in the care plan that respite session also includes making of lunch. Personal care issues are different because they are seen as they arise. So assistance with a commode or something like that is going to be, but it needs to be outlined in the care plan for a respite session that it will also be, it will include a meal. A lot of limitations in terms of whether there's laundry being done, because if there's somebody in the household that can do laundry, they don't normally see that as a need. It would only be if somebody was living alone, and even then they're reluctant to provide that service. It has a lot to do with who the individual is. Those provided through home health, again, are supposed to follow a protocol. And so it'll be the odd occasion somebody would help out with the laundry, even though they weren't instructed to. There's far more leeway when you've personally garnered the service of care staff, where you can outline whatever it is you want with them. It's agreed to beforehand. It's like any other job. That also goes for an agency where you've discussed with them beforehand what would be involved and what wouldn't be, and they'll tell you whether they can or can't. Same thing with if it's private care staff coming into your home, what the expectations are, what they, when they do it, far more leeway because you're the boss. That's really what it boils down to. You're paying for it within reason, because if the focus is to try and have a quality visit, then don't load them up with a whole bunch of things to do because they'll be busy. I'm mindful of the time that we have and just going to cover off a couple of other things. Was there any other questions or anything, Nisa?
No, that's it.
No. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is, you saw the poster, and I would encourage anyone who's part of the presentation today who's connected with anything that's been said or needs further clarification, please reach out. That poster had contact information for Nisa in it, and she's one that's corresponded with you about this presentation anyway, so feel free to reach out. And these are just some very helpful resources. The CBC documentary that that we've noted at the top, it's, if you're living this is one of the best documentaries. I get emotional just talking about it because they do a great job of capturing real life. It's tough to watch. I think anyone who's living this can probably relate, and so probably not advised that you watch it with somebody else who you're looking after, because they probably won't see themselves in it. It might be hard for them to watch and have you. They won't see your relatability to what's in the documentary. So I suggest you do it on your own. A great an organization that we work hand in hand with all the time is Family Caregivers of BC. They have a hotline. It's not like a 24-hour hotline, but it does have some pretty decent hours that if you're just feeling as though you could use some help with something that's bothering you, you just need to vent a little bit. I will tell you that as one of their premium partners, so to speak, that if you live locally, you're going to be referred back to us anyway, as far as local resources. The Alzheimer's Society, if that's somebody you're working with. I see can you change the font on that, Lisa?
Yes, I can. I'll also send it in an email afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, all of this I think is being sent to anyone so that you can refer back to whatever it is. And the Care Blazers, again, we're in a position making references to specific organizations or service providers. I just find Care Blazers extremely helpful for those who are caring for somebody living with dementia. She's really good. She's got all kinds of insight. Most of her videos are posted to YouTube, and if you sign up for her regular stuff, you'll get probably inundated with regular things. I think it's just very helpful. It might just be what you need at the end of the day to connect with a helpful tip. She breaks things down a lot in terms of specifics, like what was when we were just reading, when your loved one refuses, to take a shower. Again, I'm pretty sure Care Blazers is specifically focused on those living with dementia. And is there any more slides after that, Nisa?
No, there isn't. I'm just changing the color. You can go ahead.
But basically that was our presentation for today. As I said, everyone who's been part of this, if something wasn't answered, needs further clarification, please reach out. And we'd also love to hear, if there was something that wouldn't have been necessarily appropriately covered in today's subject, but you'd love to hear about, shoot us a message. We'd be happy to try and to address it, to the masses, so that we're trying to cover, because you're probably not alone. but also provide some immediate sort of one-on-one. So on behalf of Nisa and myself, I'd like to thank all of you for your time, for sharing, and most importantly, for trusting us. And if there was anyone with a last minute question, I'd be happy to answer it. Thanks, Joan. I think that's probably got it then.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to connecting with any and all of you soon.
All right. Thank you, Rick. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Have a great day.